Hello, this is Dave from SEB Housing. This is going to be the info session for Trio and Newton. We're a little bit early, so I'm just getting set up here. I have to do a conference call as well for folks who'd like to join by way of conference call. But for anyone who's already waiting for us to start, could you just type in the box to the right of where you see me, just to confirm that you can hear me? Thank you. Great, thanks for confirming. And great, thank you everyone, appreciate that. Glad to see we have a nice number of folks already tuning in, so I'm glad that you were able to find it. And let me just get the phone call started. And I'll just say now that I'm going to go through, the basic outline of what this opportunity is, how to apply, what to expect in terms of a timeline. But at any point, if anyone who's watching this has a question, please feel free to type it in. Just make sure you're typing to the right of the screen where you see me and not below. Below me is the comment section, and I don't get to see that. But if you type in the box to the right of where you see me, I will address your question as soon as I see it. So let me just get these other folks on by way of the call, and then we'll get started. And again, this is the information session for the affordable and middle income units at Trio in Newtonville.
Welcome, and thank you for choosing freeconferencecall.com. You're helping people around the world communicate for free. Please enter your access code followed. If you are the host, press star now. Otherwise, please enter your PIN followed by the pound or hash. Thank you. There are 2 participants in the conference. Please announce yourself.
This is Dave from SEB.
Hi Dave, Quick Ingram, how are you?
Hey.
I'm talking today for the info session.
Yep, great. Thanks for joining. So just so that you know, we are doing this both by live stream and by phone. So I'm kind of talking to 2 different audiences at once here. But as I just told the folks who are watching by live stream, I'm going to go through kind of generally what this opportunity is and what to expect, what the eligibility requirements are, and what the timeline kind of looks like going forward. But ultimately, this session is for all of you. So if at any point anyone has a question, for folks on the phone, obviously you can just ask me over the phone, and I'll stop and repeat the question, because I'm guessing that people who are watching online won't be able to hear what someone who's asking a question over the phone is asking. And similarly, if someone asks a question who's watching online, by way of typing it, I will try and repeat that question before answering it, so that the folks who are on the phone can hear what the question is. So we're still just a few minutes early. So again, just looks like we've got a great turnout so far, which is awesome to see. I'm going to wait for just 3 more minutes till my phone shows 6, and then we will get started.
Okay, thank you. So this link in the newspaper is correct?
The link for the YouTube, yeah, that's correct. So you can just,
Yeah, it didn't work for me.
um,
Try it again.
you know what's actually probably easier is to just go in YouTube and type in SEB housing, and then in the results section, you'll see several thumbnails. One of them will be for Trio. You just click on that. Looking at a question online here. What is Newton's AMI? Newton is in the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy AMI, CASRA, and I will go through that during this session. There's not just one AMI for this property. There's actually four. It's all Boston, Cambridge, Quincy, but there are units at 50, 80, 100, and 120% of the AMI. So again, I will go through that. And for anyone who's tuning in, if you haven't already, please feel free to, you can go on our website, www.sebhousing.com, and on there, if you click in the affordable housing opportunities, and then you can see an option for rental or home ownership. If you click rental, and then you click on the Trio information, there's an information packet and an application right there, and you can download either, and it may be helpful to follow along as we go through this. I will be using the information packet as sort of my guide in what we're discussing, and if you want to follow along, that may be a nice resource. So again, just quickly, www.sebhousing.com, click on affordable housing opportunities, then click on I want to rent, and then Trio should be one of the top options at the top of the page. In case folks are going to navigate their way there, it looks like there is a question from Larry about what you're supposed to do if your jobs have been shut down. I mean, this is obviously a tricky time, and we're sensitive to that. And I'm sorry if that's applicable to you. You know, it's not, as I'll go through. This is not subsidized housing, so you know, you will still have to demonstrate that you're under the applicable income limits, but also that you have enough that you'll be able to afford the rents. Now, that part of the process won't come into play as much until later on, when in fact it comes time to apply for a lease. But we will be looking at your whole income and asset picture. Perhaps you have assets that could demonstrate an ability to meet the obligations of being able to afford the rent. If you're collecting unemployment, that's something that we would count as income. So I don't know if that helps you, but you know, unfortunately, it is not subsidized housing, so there is still a requirement to show an ability to cover the rent. There was also a question from Haley. Haley, this link will continue to exist after this is done, so you can come back and watch it at any time. So for any folks who are just joining, my name is David Cashman. I work at SEB Housing. We are an off-site affordable housing consultant located in Needham, but as you can see, I'm working from home right now. And we get hired on projects throughout the state of Massachusetts, primarily on 40B projects by developers who, in the vast majority of the developments that we work on, there's usually it's new construction, and there is a market rate component and an affordable component. The affordable units typically make up anywhere from 10 to 25% of the units in the building. We are not on site at the properties where we work, but we do work closely with the management teams to help them through the process. We have a lot of experience working in this field, and we've worked on dozens and dozens and dozens of lotteries, conducting the lotteries, doing the marketing campaigns, putting out the materials that I'm going to be discussing with you this evening, and that's available on our website, and making sure that the marketing and lottery process is conducted in a fair and transparent manner that complies with all of the rules and regulations surrounding affordable housing. So this is the info session for Trio, which is in Newtonville. Obviously, Newton is a very desirable place to live, and this is a wonderful opportunity. I happen to grow up not far from where this is, and this is a nice part of Newton that's undergone. There's been a lot of nice development in Newtonville in the last 10 or so years. There's a bunch of new restaurants and shops in Newtonville, and it's in a desirable location in the sense of very easy access to the Mass Pike, getting down to Boston, if that's of interest to you. There's also the commuter rail right across the way. You've got the high school right there with lots of open green spaces and many other amenities that Newton has to offer. And obviously, that's reflected in the fact that we already have 50 plus people in this info session, which is a wonderful turnout. So what is, hold on, there's a couple more questions here. So Larry, let me just go through, if you don't mind. I'm just going to kind of go through bit by bit, and then I think some of these questions that people are asking are probably going to be answered. So let me just get started, and then if you could just actually, I know I said please go ahead and ask questions. Let's just hold for a couple minutes. Let me kind of get started, talk through some of the requirements. I hopefully will answer some of your questions. If not, I'll take a break and check back in. And if I haven't answered the question, I can do it specifically. So let me just, I know I said initially ask questions as soon as you have them. I'm a little concerned that if I'm constantly going back with the number that have already come in already, it's going to be a little choppy. So let's actually do this. Let me get started, and then I will kind of open it up to some questions, and then we'll kind of proceed a little further and go in that manner. So affordable housing means different things to different people. One thing to be clear on for this particular opportunity is that affordable doesn't mean subsidized. It means that the units are being offered at a rate that is less than what they would be on the market. And there are income limits that apply that you have to be below in order to qualify. But the expectation is that or a requirement is that you have to be able to make enough to afford the rent on your own. This development is a little bit unique from some of the other properties that we work with, in the sense that there are both affordable and middle income units. And beyond that, within the affordable, there are units being offered at 50% of AMI, units being offered at 80% AMI, and within the middle income program, there are units being offered to folks at 100% of AMI and 120%. So there's a really good spread here, and we will go through what some of those income limits look like. If you would like to get a sense of all the units that are available, a good place to look is just page 3 of your information packet. Trio has 140 units in total. 35 of them are going to be made available through this process. And those are being made available in a variety of sizes: studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. If you look at that table, you'll see the number of each bedroom size. So the top row, you have 1 studio unit at 50% AMI. It's about 583 square feet, and the rent per month is $923. And then you can go through and see all of those going all the way to the bottom, which is a 3-bedroom, 100% AMI unit. That's 1,297 square feet. And the rent on that is $2,549. And then everything else in that table is kind of everything in between. Now, when you're looking at this, you may be asking sort of how do you figure out which one to apply for and how does that work? When you apply, you'll fill out an application. Again, our application's available on our website. You do not need to indicate the income tier that you're interested in. Rather, on page 2, right after you say what your name and contact information is, you just indicate the bedroom size that you're interested in. So for anyone who happens to have the application in front of them, you will check on page 2 in the boxes that are there if you're interested in a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or a 3-bedroom. Okay? Now, based on the information that you put in your application, we will then determine what income tier you qualify at. So it is, thanks, Brian, for answering questions. That's helpful. So we will determine, based on the information that you provide, what income tier you're in. Now, it's important, and you'll see in the application, there is a table that starts on page 6 and goes all the way through page 8. You are going to list all of your income and all of your assets. That is what we are going to base our determination on. And as you'll see, in this program, we're required to count income pretty expansively. So income is more than just what's on your W-2 or what your job pays you if you have other income sources coming in. So, for example, unemployment isn't something that people necessarily think of as income, but in this program, we're required to consider it as income. If you have an uncle, a benefactor, who gives you $300 a month to help with groceries or some other thing that you need help with, that's money coming in. That counts as income. If you're self-employed, that's income. So if you have your kind of regular day job and then you drive an Uber at night to supplement, that's also considered income. If you get Social Security or child support or alimony, or if you have a pension or retirement that you're drawing down on, that's all income. So I would invite you, when you are filling out this application, to be very thoughtful and think about what your income is and to make sure that you complete all of those boxes, because if you don't, and you say that you make $50,000 a year, but when you said that, you were really only thinking about your W-2 day job, and you forgot to tell us about the fact that you've been driving Uber for 5 months, and you also have an uncle who gives you $200 a month, and then later on in the process, you know, that comes to light, well, that could kick you out of the income tier that we initially found you eligible at. We don't need to get too bogged down in the details of what happens then, but suffice to say that if you tell us you make $50,000 and say that means that you're within the 80% AMI income tier, when in fact you make quite a bit more than that, such that you're in the 100% AMI income tier, then that means that you could ultimately lose a reservation on the specific unit that you wanted after the lottery and have to slide down a couple spots. So don't worry too much about sort of the consequences, but point is, please be very thoughtful and careful when you're filling out the application, and make sure that you are including all of your income sources so that that doesn't become an issue later on. I do want to bounce back for just a minute. The rents that I quoted, and I know I just quoted sort of the the studio at 50% AMI and the 3-bedroom at 100% AMI. Those do not include utilities. And so the utilities at this property that tenants will be expected to pay are gas, heat, and hot water, and cooking, electricity, water, and sewer. So those additional costs will be borne by the tenant. For the 50% and 80% AMI units, one parking spot is included. For the middle income units, a parking spot is not included, and it's I think it's around $200 a month. I should also note that several of the units, as this is new construction, all units are adaptable, but several of the units are also built out for persons with mobility impairments, and I believe there is also a unit built out for persons who are deaf or hard of hearing. If that applies to you, you will get priority for those units. And there's a question on the application about whether or not that applies, and it's right within the first couple of pages. So if it does, please make sure to indicate that so that you get the preference for those units that you deserve. What are the eligibility requirements for this opportunity? Well, one of the biggest ones is you have to have income that's below what is allowed in this program. Also, it's not so much a requirement, but in terms of how the lottery shakes out and where priorities are given, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but there are different priorities for some of these units. And the way the lottery is going to work in general is that households that are bigger and need all of the bedrooms in the unit will get priority over households who are smaller and who do not need all of the bedrooms in the unit, even if they might like all of the bedrooms in the unit. And I will talk a little bit about how that works when I talk about the lottery drawing and the waiting lists. If anyone who's watching or tuning in owns a home, you cannot own a home at the time that you go to sign a lease. So if that applies to you, you would need to consider making arrangements to put that home on the market and get it sold prior to moving in. And finally, I don't believe this comes up very often, but if you have any kind of financial interest in this development, that would bar you from moving forward for this opportunity. We talked a little bit about if you're interested in exactly what the maximum income limits are. There is a table that lays all of that out for you on page 5 of the information packet. There's probably too many for me to go through in a way that's useful. That information is right there and you can just read it. But just by way of example, if you are a one-person household, for a 50% unit, you can make up to $44,800. For an 80% unit, you can make up to $67,400. For a 100% AMI unit, you can make up to $83,300. And for a 120% AMI unit, you can make up to $99,960. Okay, and so that's just, I just went across the row for one person, but you can see if you look at that table, again, page 5 of the information packet, we go through at each income tier from one person all the way up to 6 people. And again, that's everyone that would be living in the unit, signing the lease or living there as their primary residence. So that's what's going to apply. When you're thinking about how many people are in your household, that's the relevant determination. Who's going to be living there as their primary residence, often is evidenced by the fact that they're on the lease. Now, the next section, we talk a little bit, and again, we put together, still on page 5 of the info pack, we put together a minimum income and assets. Now, I want to be very clear that this program does not actually have a minimum income and asset requirement written into the guidelines. Nevertheless, as I said at the beginning, you need to demonstrate that you have enough income and assets to be able to afford the rent. Because if you, just by way of example, if you were to apply as a two-person household and you demonstrated that your income is $20,000 a year, well, you clearly qualify because you make under the income limit, the ceiling. However, when it comes time to going to rent a unit and the leasing office wants to make sure that you have enough to be able to afford the rent, that's not going to be enough. They're going to be concerned you're not going to meet their rental screening criteria because you're going to be too rent burdened, is what it comes down to. And so we will do a more loose screening for your minimum income and assets than we do for the maximum. So we're kind of looking at this window. The maximum, again, that's what the program requires. That's a strict ceiling, and we look at that very closely to make sure that you're not above that. But we also do take a look at this minimum, this floor, to make sure that you have enough. Again, we're not looking at it as closely as the ceiling because it's not, in the guidelines for the affordable or the middle income programs. But at the end of the day, it doesn't do you any good at all, or the management company or anyone involved in the process, if you're someone who makes $20,000 a year, to say, yeah, let's move you through the lottery and everything else, if it's going to be clear at the end of the day that you don't have enough to meet the leasing office's rent screening criteria. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply if you have a Section 8 or other mobile subsidy. So if you do disregard everything I just said about minimum income and assets, you do not need to be concerned about that. We wouldn't be screening you for that. Just make sure you let us know on your application. If you have a Section 8 voucher and you make $10,000 a year and you don't let us know that you have a voucher, then we might accidentally screen you out as not having enough. So there is a question. Just make sure that if that applies to you, that you let us know that you have it. And this program does not bar anyone with a Section 8 or other mobile subsidy from applying and renting a unit. Now, you may want to take the rents and run them by your housing authority at some point, just to make sure that they're not above what the housing authority is willing to pay. But that being said, with 50% units at this property, that's probably not going to be an issue. I don't need to get too bogged down in details with how income is calculated. It's very kind of applicant specific. Everyone's income picture is different. As I kind of talked a little bit about at the beginning, income is broadly defined in this program, and there are many different sources of income. So I don't know how useful it is to kind of try and go through every possible type of income and what they all mean. But I think suffice to say, just for your own kind of background and edification, when we're looking at your income picture, we're doing a projection as best as we can of what your income is going to be over the next 12 months. And obviously, any projection has to take into account what you're making now and what you've made historically and most recently in the last 6 months or so. So someone saying that that they drive, they've primarily made money in the gig economy. I know that that's been thrown way off now, but just as an easy example, and they were making $4,000 a month driving an Uber, but then they tell us, that that's going to totally change. We'll have to look at that. In most times, you can't just sort of project an income that's, half of what you've been making. But I also do recognize these are very difficult times and things are changing for people. So we will work with you, but just give us your best, when you're talking about what your income is, give us your best projection of what it's going to be over the next few months. All sources of income are counted with a couple of exceptions. If you have a child under 18, any income that they get from working doesn't get counted towards your income picture. and full-time students who are dependents, everything over $480 does not get counted. So if they made $1,000 a year, we would only count $480 of that, and the other $520 just wouldn't count. There is also, in your application, we have to look at your asset picture. The assets, again, there are many different sources of assets, and we list a number of the different types of assets that people have in the application. It's important also to list all of those and to list them as accurately as you can. I should note, though, that as this is a rental property, and so there isn't a hard asset limit. So, you could have a hefty amount in savings, and that's not going to put you over an asset limit because there isn't one. However, we do have to look at the income that's generated by your assets, and the income that's attributable to the asset gets added to your income picture. I don't think it's often that people have assets that generate high enough amounts of income to put their income over the limit, but it does happen. So please just be aware that's something that we do by program requirement have to look at and add to your income picture. And that could include something like a house. So if you're a homeowner, then, we'd be looking at the equity that you have in the house and what you're going to put it on the market for and what you would stand to get from that transaction. That would be an asset. And there are many, many examples of assets: savings account, checking account, CDs, etc. Sometimes people wonder, 401ks, people have those and they wonder if they're not accessing it, does that count as an asset? It does. Again, we're looking at the net cash value, but again, there's no specific asset limit as this is rental. So there's not really any, downside from just being very clear and honest about what all of your assets are. So the first step, and I probably should have led with this, I've been sort of discussing it without sort of giving you the header, but the header on this in your application, your income picture, your application, this is kind of step one, which is just applying for the program. And if there is probably one takeaway that you can take from this session is if you're interested and you think that you might like to live at Trio, get your application into us before the deadline, because the only way I can assure that you won't be able to move forward in this process is if you don't apply. The deadline is May 22nd. So that is honestly, take a look at some of the income and asset requirements. And if you think that you qualify or you're close, I'd encourage you to apply. Because again, the only way you can assure that you can't move forward is to not apply. Another thing is a lot of times when we run lotteries, we require a lot of the supporting documentation just to get into the lottery. So all your W-2s, taxes, things like that. That's not required to get into this lottery. It will be later, but the effort sort of up front just to fill out the application with what your income and assets are and what you're applying for is definitely quite a bit lower than it is for lotteries that we do where you have to supply all the supporting documentation. Again, the supporting documentation will come later, and if you apply and you're eligible, we'll send you a guide. So you have plenty of time to look through that guide, and that guide will spell out in detail all of the documents, the supporting documentation that will be required. If you apply and you are eligible, I would strongly encourage you to look through that guide and begin to collect some of that documentation. And the reason for that is that after the lottery, if you actually are able to reserve a unit and move forward in this process, you will have deadlines that apply to you. And you will have to submit all of your documentation and complete the application with us by those deadlines. If you apply for the lottery and you're eligible and you say, great, that's it, I'm not going to do anything, I'll just kind of wait, and when the lottery comes, that's great, and maybe I get a good position on the waiting list, great, and then all of a sudden, you move forward and you have a reservation, and we say, great, now you got to submit all of this documentation, but you haven't done anything to collect it or get it ready. You may find that you're only going to have 10 days to do it. That may sneak up very quickly, and it may not be enough time if you haven't done anything in the preceding months or weeks. So again, when you apply, make sure to take a good look at that documentation guide that we give to you. And I would recommend that if, especially if there are things that are on there that you think could be a little tricky to get, start pulling some of those together, because you don't want to be scrambling in a month down the road time after the lottery, and maybe you have a unit. You don't want to be concerned about losing that unit because you couldn't get some of the documentation. Now, again, on that front, I totally recognize these are tricky times. Documents are harder to get, and we will absolutely work with you if there's something you can't get and there's a valid reason behind it. But what it doesn't mean is, I guess I just wouldn't recommend doing nothing if there's a document that you really should be able to get. I'd encourage you to start working on that when you get the guide. The other thing that you'll get when you apply, if you're eligible, is you'll get an application number. The application number is merely an anonymous identifier that helps us keep track of everyone and run the lottery in a way that keeps it anonymous. That number will be in the form of A dot, and then there'll be three numbers, so A.001 or A.005 or whatever it may be, okay? That number merely corresponds to the order in which you submitted your application, but that's it. That the person who gets A.001, that does not mean that they are going to be number one in the lottery. It just means they were the first person to submit their application. If you don't have a number by May 22nd and you think that you are moving forward in this process, you really should be contacting us before then to find out what's going on, because it doesn't happen often, but I have seen people show up for lotteries thinking that they're going to be in the lottery because they submitted, an application, but their application was incomplete. And we told them it was incomplete, and they never got an application number. And that's obviously not an ideal thing to have happen. It's unfortunate to see someone show up for the lottery excited about it, only to find out they're not actually in the lottery. They never got an application number. So again, if you think you're moving forward around May 22nd, you've submitted an application, make sure that you've got that application number. That's your kind of ticket to know that you are in the lottery. And again, our response times are quick. It's a matter of a couple days. So anytime that you submit stuff to us, you should expect to hear back within just a couple of days. And there shouldn't be too many incomplete applications, given that there's no real documentation required with your initial application. Okay, so that's kind of, I think that's kind of an idea on step one. So step one is submit your application. We'll look at your income and assets. If you're eligible, we'll let you know you're eligible. We'll give you an application number. You hold on to that, and that is your ticket to get into the lottery. Again, when you fill out your application, just list what unit size you're applying for. Again, here's an important point. You can apply for as many or as few as you want. So if really the only thing that you could possibly be interested in at Trio is a studio, you could just check on your application that you're applying for a studio and nothing more. But if later on you decide, oh, you know what, I kind of like that one bedroom, wouldn't that be nice? If you didn't apply for it, it's too late at that point. On the other hand, if you think, hey, I would just love to live at Trio, and if I could live in a studio, a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, or 3, I'll take any of them, then apply for all of them. You may not be eligible for all 3 or all 4. I mean, it's maybe unlikely that someone would be, but that's okay, so maybe you're not eligible for the studio, but you're eligible for the 1, the 2, and the 3, or maybe you're eligible for the studio, the 1 and the 2, and not the 3. That's fine. And again, if you're eligible for more than one, there's absolutely no harm or detriment or downside to you of being eligible for more than one, because all that will end up meaning is that when we run the lottery, you'll be on more than one waiting list. And ultimately, if you get a great spot, you could, in theory, have a choice. So if you have any inclination that you think you could be happy living at Trio in, a studio, a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, whatever it is, just check off all that apply. It does not hurt you at all to be over-inclusive on those choices. Now, when we run the lottery, there are certain priorities that we have to give that are governed by the program. So these lotteries are different than what most people think of when they think of a lottery. When people think of a lottery, they think there's winners, there's losers. Only some numbers get drawn. All the other numbers, they hang their head and they walk away. They're not the winners of the lottery. That is not how this works, okay? The way that these lotteries work, if you haven't been involved in one, is everyone who's in the lottery will get a position on the waiting list. There will be a bunch of different waiting lists because there are units of 4 different sizes and 4 different tiers, and there's a local preference. So there's going to be 1, 4, 5. How do you count? 15, 16 waiting lists, something like that. So there's a bunch of them, okay? But the point is, everyone who applies and is eligible will have a position on a waiting list. Now, it may not be the exact position you want, but you'll be on there somewhere. I'm going to go into that a little more. Now, you have your application number. When we do the lottery drawing, and that will probably be via YouTube stream, just like this, we'll do two big drawings. The first one will be all the households who are local preference Newton residents. That means households who live in Newton, work in Newton, or have kids attending the Newton schools. The first drawing will include all the local preference households. So we'll put them in a box, we'll draw them out, and I'll call them as we go. The next drawing will be those households, again, and all the other households that are not Newton local preference, that don't qualify for local preference. So we'll do that drawing, and again, we'll pull all the numbers out of the box, and we'll call them as we go. Then, once that's done, we have to sort the results according to the required preferences. And there are a number of those. But just to give you an example, let's say you qualified and were eligible for a 50% 3-bedroom apartment. And there is a waiting list that has a local preference that's applicable to this apartment. Type 3 households will get priority for 3-bedroom apartment over all Type 2 households. And all Type 2 households will get priority over all Type 1 households for a 3-bedroom apartment. Doesn't matter the exact order that the applications were actually drawn out of the box, because we have to do this sorting. Now, you might be scratching your head and saying, what is a Type 3 household? What is a Type 2 household? What is a Type 1 household? Well, when you fill out your application, on page 3, right at the top, you'll see household type in big, bold, underline. And then we will go through Type 3 household, Type 2 household, Type 1, and give examples of each. In general, what this means is a Type 3 household is a household who, by program requirements, needs 3 bedrooms, okay? So if you have 6 people who are going to be moving in to this, any 6-person household needs 3 bedrooms. Any 5-person household needs 3 bedrooms. Any 4-person household needs 3 bedrooms. If it's a parent with 2 kids, the program would say a parent with 2 kids needs 3 bedrooms, but 2 parents and a kid does not, because typically parents share a bedroom. So if it's a married couple with 1 kid, you'd be a type 2 household and you would get priority for a 2-bedroom unit, but you'd be behind any type 3 households for a 3-bedroom unit. So what that means in practice when we do the drawing is if you're 2 heads of household with a kid, you're a type 2 household, and one of the units that you applied for was a 3-bedroom unit, well, even if you get picked really early on in the lottery, any type 3 household who also applied for a 3-bedroom unit is going to leapfrog you when we do the sorting. Okay, so they're going to just automatically go ahead of you. Now, they wouldn't go ahead of you for a 2-bedroom unit. Why? Because a type 2 household needs a 2-bedroom unit just as much as a type 3 household needs a 2-bedroom unit. So, so for a type 2 household who applies for a 2-bedroom unit and gets a very high pick in the lottery, they wouldn't have to worry necessarily about getting leapfrogged by a type 3 household. Okay. There is also local preference for some of the units, but not all of them. Okay. When you look through the waiting lists in the information packet, and those are specifically listed on page 12, we list out all of the units by all of the tiers and exactly how the lottery sorting has to be done. So you'll see that for a lot of the units, I think 70% of the units, there is a local preference priority, which means that households who qualify as compared to other similarly situated households would get a slight priority, but not for all of the units. So I guess probably the most important takeaway from this is that if you're not local preference, it doesn't mean don't apply. It doesn't mean this is a waste of time. It does not mean that you don't have a chance. It doesn't mean any of those things. It only means that for some of the units at this development, households who are local preference will get a slight bump ahead of you on the waiting list after the lottery. But household type is ultimately more important than local preference in determining the order. So just by way of example, for the local preference 50% 3-bedroom unit, any type 3 household whose local preference is going to be in that first tier of priority. But the next tier is going to be a type 3 household who's not a local preference. So household type trumps local preference for 3-bedroom units and also for 2-bedroom units. Point of the story, again, local preference it does give you some of a bump for some of the units, but it absolutely does not mean that if you're not local preference, you're going to be all the way at the bottom, or this is a waste of time. It doesn't mean that at all. Excuse me, sorry. So for the person who's listening on the phone, there's a TV that's really loud that's kind of distracting. If it's possible to turn that down or go in another room, that would be really helpful, please. Thank you. So the point is, you can watch the lottery. We'll probably be streaming it, like I said. Absolutely encourage you if you want to watch. But one thing that is important to know is when you're watching, you may not know exactly what the results mean. Okay, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't watch if you want to watch. It just means you may have to be a little bit patient because of this sorting and this prioritizing that the program makes us do. If you're the first person, with some exceptions, for the most part, you can't tell when you're watching me do the picking. Oh, I was picked number 5. That means I'm going to be number 5. You won't know that because you don't know who the other people are, who the other numbers are, what they applied for, what their household type is, are they local preference, aren't they? You don't know any of those things. What will tell you is that same night or by the next morning, Brian and I will, and Brian is also works. SEB is his company, and he's the one kindly answering questions on this feed. He and I will sort the results, and we will put them on these waiting lists that I've discussed. These waiting lists, and we won't put your name, we'll just put your application number, and so you'll just have to find your application number. But those waiting lists that we send you, those will be in the order that you're kind of going to get to move forward. So that kind of takes us through the first 2 steps: applying. We run the lottery. You've got your numbers, 2 drawings, pull them out, and then we sort them and we send them to you either that night or by the next morning. Now, at this point, you have submitted an application to us. You haven't really given us any documentation, so we're kind of going based on what you've told us. And you also have not even applied for a lease or qualified. Okay, so that kind of takes us to the next step. And actually, before I get there, let me just, I'll circle back. So the next step is you apply for a lease. So that's going to happen with the leasing office at Trio. Again, we're not the leasing office. We're the offsite management, offsite consultant who's kind of doing the marketing, the lottery, working with you. But the leasing office, they have a whole team, and when you go to apply for a lease, they will screen you to see if you're eligible. Those will be essentially the same criteria that anyone applying for a market rate unit is being screened on. So I would assume it's things like your credit and possibly your rental history and possibly, a query screening to see if there's a criminal background that would make you ineligible. Okay. So again, just keep that in mind. We have not screened you for those things. We did look to make sure, kind of loosely that you have indicated that you make enough to afford the rent, but we haven't looked at your, credit history or any of these other things that leasing offices look at. We are determining based at this point what you've told us, are you eligible for the program? Okay, and that's a separate determination from are you eligible for a lease? I want to be very clear on this point because some people think, well, I'm eligible for the lottery. That's great. I've qualified. That's it. No, that's one. It's a step. It's a big step, but it's not it's not the final step. And I don't want someone to be totally surprised if they are eligible for this program. We do the lottery drawing. They get a great result. They get invited in by the leasing office to apply for a lease, and the leasing office says, I'm sorry, you don't qualify for a lease here based on, a credit issue or whatever the case may be. So please just keep that in mind that the lottery and the program, the lottery step is one step in a multi-step process. Now, there usually are, as far as the lease screening goes, we're not, those specific questions will have to be addressed to the leasing office. And sometimes, there can be flexibility on certain points. So if you're not, I guess if you're concerned that you may not qualify, sometimes, there can be, they may be able to work with you. But again, that's something that you'll take up with them. Another thing to keep in mind here is there will be a time limit that most likely applies to you for when you can apply for a lease. And the reason for that is we've generated these waiting lists. There are other households that are interested. It wouldn't be fair to everyone else involved for you to take 2 months to go in and apply for a lease. You'd probably be given about a week or so. And that's because they have to keep the process moving. And if you're someone who's got a great result on, great waiting list position, but you're actually kind of hemming and hawing and you're thinking about living somewhere else and you're not sure, it wouldn't be fair to all the people behind you to take 2 months to go in and apply for a lease. So make sure that if you are in the lottery and you get a waiting list position and your time has come up to go in and apply for a lease, that you do it within the time period that's given to you by the leasing office. Now, this isn't to say you're going to be rushed to come in a really quick manner and be given an insufficient amount of time. I don't think that's the case, but again, it'd probably be about a week or so, and so you want to be ready to go in and apply for a lease within that time period that's given to you. After you've completed that step, and assuming that you've met the leasing office's screening criteria, that is the point at which you would then circle back with SEB Housing and to complete your program application. Because remember, at this point, you've submitted an application, but you didn't give us any of the documents that really show what your income and assets are. And this is where a half an hour or so ago, when I was mentioning the document requirements guide that you get when you are eligible for the lottery, that you want to look at that, because if you're lease eligible and you reserve a unit, now you have to complete the process with us, provide all that documentation, and there's also going to be a time limit there, because again, there are people behind you who are interested, and it wouldn't be fair to them, for this process to take 3 months, or to the leasing office. They would like to get, this is a great opportunity. They want to get people in, and, it can't take 3 months for someone to complete the program application with us. So that is the reason why when you get that document requirements guide, start collecting some of those things, because if you are lucky enough to get a great waiting list position and then you reserve a unit, you're eligible for a lease, you want to make sure that you have all of that documentation ready to submit to us to complete the program application. If you get through that step, excellent. You're lease eligible, you're program eligible. Now you can sign a lease and you can move in. So that's kind of how this process is going to go. I think you can think of it as I guess maybe 3 distinct steps. What that means in terms of the waiting list, which I had talked a little bit about earlier, is just because you don't get a really high position on a waiting list, it really isn't cause for you to despair or think that this opportunity is over and you might as well move on. It is often the case that leasing offices have to screen 3 to 4 times as many people as there are units to fill all of their units. And the reasons for that are varied, but they could include things like people with waiting list positions are not actually lease eligible. People with waiting list positions are lease eligible, but when it comes time to submit their documentation to us, they're not program eligible, or they're eligible at one tier, but it's a different tier than what they indicated when they applied, or circumstances change and they actually don't want to live at Trio and they're interested in a lottery at a different property, or they don't want to move at all, they want to stay where they are, whatever the case may be. But the point is, if you do not have a top position, it is really not cause for keep a positive attitude, because there is a real chance that your turn could still come up. And by that same token, if you do have a top position, please just remember that that's not the end of this process. There are still other steps that need to be completed, and they need to be completed in a timely fashion, and hopefully you are prepared to do that. If you do end up leasing a unit at Trio, one of the things that's nice is that your income can every year you have to recertify. Maybe that's the not so nice part, but hopefully having done it before, it will not be as difficult and you'll be prepared for it. The nice thing is that your income can increase up to 140% of the specific income tier that you're at, and you can maintain eligibility. So if you're doing a great job at work and your boss wants to give you a raise, provided it's not a doubling of your salary, hopefully that's not going to bump you over the income limit. Just to give you an example, working with current numbers right now, and we've listed these out by household size for all 4 income tiers, and you can find those on page 17 of your information packet. But just to give you an example, a household size of 1 who's applying now for an 80% unit can make up to $67,400. Now that same household, in a year from now, when they have to recertify to demonstrate that they're still eligible for the program, they can make up to $94,360. So almost $30,000 more still eligible for the program. So there's a nice cushion in there to have your income increase and maintain eligibility. One thing I should have mentioned earlier that I forgot to when I was talking about the lease application process and how that works. When you go to meet with the leasing office and you apply for a lease and you're wanting to select a unit, you can select from any of the units from your waiting list that you're being invited from that are available. So just by way of example, there are, let's see here, there are 4 80% 2-bedroom apartments at Trio on this local list. So if you are being invited from that list to move forward and apply for a lease, then you would be able to select from any of the 2-bedroom 80% units that are available. And so maybe, sometimes units don't all come online at exactly the same time. I know in this case that the East building is going to have units that are ready in early July, I think, and the middle and west buildings will be closer to the end of August. But in theory, you might be, maybe the end of August is a better timeline for you. And maybe you go in and meet with them and you say, I actually want the unit that's coming online in the end of August in the west building because that fits better with my schedule and kind of finishing out my current lease. You can do that. That's totally your prerogative. And once you reserve that unit, then that unit's off the market and the next person on the list can apply, reserve from any of the 2 bedrooms that are still left, and so on and so forth until all of the units are reserved. Another thing just to say on that point is that these units are pre-selected and they have been approved by both the city of Newton and by the state. They're selected to make sure that they're evenly distributed in a fair and sort of equitable, representative fashion throughout the building. So what that means is that the affordable or middle income units are not identifiable as such for anyone who's walking through the building. There's not anything that would distinguish them from the outside. They're not all clustered in one corner. They're not all placed in a less desirable location within the buildings. They are evenly scattered kind of on different floors, west building, middle building, east building. So that's a nice thing to feel good about, that that these units are interspersed in a way that's been approved by both the city of Newton and the state. I think that's hopefully gives you a general picture of kind of how this process works. what to expect. As I said at the beginning, if the the biggest thing you can probably take away from tonight is if you look through the information packet and you think you're interested and you might qualify, I really highly encourage you to apply. It shouldn't take that much time to get your application in, and it's the only way we can, the only way to assure you can't move forward is to not do it by the deadline. So if you think you're interested, please submit an application and we will kind of work with you through this process. I know, Brian, you've been answering a lot of these questions online. Are there any folks on the phone who have questions? Sure.
My question is for you is that can you submit your application and supportive document via email into SEB for the Trio Washington claim?
The question is, can you submit the supporting documentation?
Yes, like via email and a PDF, like over to your office.
Yeah, so I think the question is about the method of delivering documentation and whether or not documents can be provided via email. And the answer to that question is yes. You can definitely, and in fact, that's probably the preferable way to do it. We are heavily email focused. We do a ton of communication with applicants by email, and it's definitely the quickest way to do it. So if you can PDF documents and email them to us, and that email is on page 1 of the application, but I'll say it here just in case, it's info@sebhousing.com. Definitely go ahead and do that. If you would prefer to send it in the mail, you can do that. We also have a Dropbox. Again, I don't know exactly where we'll, no one is submitting documentation yet. You're just submitting your applications, and those can also be faxed. Those can be emailed or sent in. I don't know exactly where we'll be in a couple months when it's likely that people are starting to submit the supporting documentation, after they've reserved a unit and they are completing the program application with us. Hopefully we'll be, through this, or things will be more kind of under control, I guess, with this pandemic. But for the moment, obviously sending anything that needs a signature right now would not be a great idea because our office is pretty leanly staffed. But again, no one's submitting anything now. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. I just want to be clear. So I just have to submit an application. Don't submit W-2s. Don't submit tax documents. Keep all that aside and just do the application.
So the question is, should the applicant keep their supporting documentation off to the side for now? The answer to that is yes. Right now, just submit your application and keep your supporting documentation in a place where you can access it later. And again, when you have submitted an application and if you are eligible, we will send you a guide that details all of the documentation that will be required.
Okay. I have 2 more questions, Dave. Once again, I appreciate you hosting this session.
Of course.
It was very informative. My name is Quinta Ingram, and this question is number 1 is, when does Trio Washington close? When will it open up due to the fact we're in sensitive times and our future is uncertain? I do understand that this ball has to get rolling. But when will they actually open up to start bringing in residents?
So the question is the timing of when the property will open up. In my last communication with the management team, they were saying early July, I think, for the east building, and end of August for the middle and west buildings. That was the most current estimate that I was given. Now, I'm not sure if that means every single unit within those buildings or just the first batch. That's something that you would need to clarify with them. And of course, things could be, things could be a little different in a month's time. Things are changing rapidly, but that was the last estimate that I got from them.
Okay. I think that was it for me.
Okay.
You've been very informative. I appreciate it. And one more I did. How can we view the floor plan? Because I didn't get a screenshot of the floor plan of what it looks like inside. They're pretty much going to keep it private.
I don't know that we have a shareable floor plan. The question was about floor plans. I don't know that we have that for you, but I can check. Obviously, if you are someone who is invited to move forward in applying for a lease, you would have the opportunity to view the units in some fashion. At that point, it may be that you can see a unit in person, or if restrictions are still in place, you may be looking at floor plans and photos, or virtual tours. I know properties are getting pretty creative with that. I also know this property has a pretty nice website. You can just Google Trio in Newton and look at some of the photos, just to get a sense. I don't know the specific. Again, I can't make you any promise about which specific units are being photographed, and there may be some variations, but certainly the common areas are the common areas, and they're really quite beautiful, really tasteful. So yeah, it looks like there's a roof deck, and so anyone who's interested, I'd invite you to take a look on the website. You can get a look at some of the amenities that they have there, and it looks like there are a lot. Outdoor roof decks, a game room with billiards and shuffleboard. There's a club room. There's a fitness center, a yoga studio, a spin studio, bicycle storage, outdoor plaza with cafe seating, underground garage, private storage, coffee and refreshment stations. So this is a really upscale, really nice looking property.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You got it. Any other questions from, and I'm just.
Sure, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I do too.
Sure. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, my question, I have two questions. My question is, I've lived in that building for 30 years.
Yeah.
And I've been displaced 3 times since.
Right.
I also worked for the city of Newton.
Okay.
What kind of a lottery does that fall into? Because I've been hearing different things from the developers, which are still my landlords. And can you tell me something about that?
Yeah, sure. So just for folks who are watching on YouTube, in case you didn't hear it, the question was about there was previously a building at this site, and a residential building where people lived, and some of those people were displaced when when this site was permitted and there was a new building. So there is an additional.
We were displaced 3 times. Not once.
There was an additional. There is an additional priority for displaced households within the local preference pool. So you still have the tiers, but within, for a 2-bedroom unit, if you're a type 2 household, you would have, priority over anyone else.
Okay, I'm a type 1 household. Will that make a difference?
It depends. For a 2-bedroom unit, you would, I think, still be behind bigger households. For a 1-bedroom unit, if there's a local preference, you would have top priority.
Okay, and my other question was, if you don't mind, I don't know if you've mentioned this because I kind of got caught out in the middle. You keep saying, you have an allotted period of time to get in your financials, but no one's giving you an idea of when those financials need to start from. Is it going to be from August back 6 months? I mean, it's hard to get them ready when you don't know what they're looking for.
So so the question is about how to get the supporting documentation together for the application. And the answer, I think, is best. I think the best answer I can give you is the documents requirements guide that I referenced will give you a really clear picture of what exactly is required.
Well, I've already submitted my application. I've gotten my application number, and I got the information, but it does not give dates. Like we want 6 months back on.
Oh, it should. I mean, it should for things where you can. So the question is about kind of giving dates. And so, you know, for something like pay stubs, it'd be your last 5 pay stubs. For something like bank statements, it would be, you know, your last, last 3 months, something to that effect.
Oh, okay. So bank statements would be last 3 months because it was on there and it said something about 6 months they check, and I wasn't sure. So I've been printing them off like since forever, since it started.
Yeah.
So
Right. So, and again, just going to try and kind of repeat the question here so everyone's in the loop. And I see that there are some, sorry, just one sec. I see that there are some questions on the live chat, and I'm going to kind of do my best to kind of address all of them. Brian, if you're still there, please go ahead and feel free to address some of those. Otherwise, let me do 1 or 2 more on the phone, and then I'll start going through some of the questions that are coming in via the live chat. But this question has to do with, again, the timing of the supporting documentation. A lot of the timing is not going to be, you know, going back to, say, a specific month or something like that. It's going to be your most recent, 3 or your most recent 5 or whatever the case may be. So what that means is if you're already collecting, if you're already collecting bank statements, but you're not submitting them right now, well, in fact, in 2 months, when it becomes your time to submit your program application, 1 or 2 of the months now may be too old, if you know what I mean. So there actually may not be an advantage to you of collecting them now because, some of them, again, if you already have January statement ready, well, that would be great if you were submitting your program application supporting documentation today. But in June or July, January is going to be too old. We're going to be looking for June, May, April. Yeah.
I just didn't know when they were going to start.
When is the initial lottery going to take place?
The lottery is on. Just give me 1 sec here. So the lottery is the 8th of June.
8th of June, okay.
8th of June, yep. Okay, let me go to some of the...
Will we get a new information packet when the time gets closer saying exactly what we need as opposed to the one they sent now, which is kind of general?
No, you wouldn't get a new information packet. Yeah. You mean the document requirements guide?
I knew requirements. I'm sorry, yes.
No, I mean, I think whatever we sent you should be still applicable at that point. If there's something that seems like it's outdated or less than clear, we could definitely talk about it when it becomes time or, at a future date, but it should all be written. Well, no, wait a second. So you've already received your application number and you've received the documentation requirements guide.
Right, but it doesn't tell you how many months you have to go back or how many.
No, it should.
Like a retirement fund. It doesn't say. I mean, I have my statement from the end of the year. We don't get statements monthly, so I don't know what they're looking for. How many statements do they want? They don't clarify that.
Something like that probably should be a yearly type of thing. Different assets have reports that come out at different frequencies, but something like that maybe it could be you get a yearly. For some things you get a yearly benefit letter, and if that's the case, you provide your most recent yearly benefit letter. If it's again, if it's W-2 statements, you're giving us the most recent 5. If it's bank accounts, the most recent 3. So,
Okay, that's what I.
yeah, I mean, we
It
can't
didn't
ask
say
you to
3, so I
produce
wouldn't
something
know
that doesn't exist. So if it's only,
No.
okay. So let me just, all right, I see a bunch of
Okay.
questions. If you
Hi,
don't,
I have a question.
oh, okay, hold,
Hi, I have
hold,
a question.
if you could
She's
just,
done.
if you could just hold for 1 second with your question, ma'am. I've got a bunch of questions coming in, on the,
Yeah, I did ask after the last lady.
what's that?
I did ask after the last lady.
Okay, so, all right, so let me take your question, and then for the folks online, I will go to those. Sorry for the wait. Go ahead, ma'am.
So I have 3 questions perhaps that developed. First one, the lady who was speaking just recently said that she was displaced several times from your group. I would like to know why she was displaced several times, if she'd like to share that. Because perhaps I may not want to be moving into a place that is going to not be stable enough for my child and me.
Okay, so this question for people online, this is a question about why the last caller was displaced. And I have well, she was displaced because there was a new development that was built.
Where did she go? Why?
The old buildings that
Why
existed there,
displaced from the first one? What happened with the first one? Why can't you say that?
the old buildings that used to exist there was a bunch of different buildings. There were restaurants, there was a camera store, there was some residential. I can't tell you exactly her scenario, but this is a brand new construction, new development. Everything was raised from the ground up. So she was displaced because there was a transaction where this development team bought those properties and built something new. So this is, to the extent you're wondering if this is, if this development is going to be sold and the residents displaced, I highly, highly, highly doubt that.
Or for higher price, for example.
What about the higher price?
Or for higher price.
I'm
For
not sure.
more money after time. For how long will it last? That the low rents are stable.
Right. So the question from the caller is about how long the rents will stay at affordable or middle income, as we've talked about, and the answer is in perpetuity. Now, the rents can change each year based on the numbers published by HUD, but they will still be affordable or middle income. So it's not like this opportunity is going to exist for 5 years and then all of a sudden all of these units are going to go to market rate. These are designated as affordable or middle income in perpetuity. Does that answer your question?
Okay. And they're all rental units and no purchasable units, correct?
Correct. All rental units, not for sale.
So the 140 units are all rentals?
Correct.
Okay. And then if someone is from another town and has a Section 8 voucher, how can they bring their voucher to your town and your unit?
So the question from the caller is about a Section 8 voucher that's issued by a housing authority in a different town. And so the answer to that is people who have housing authorities from different towns are absolutely not prevented from applying or qualifying here. As long as your voucher is mobile, it should be fine. And that's just an issue you would want to take up with the housing authority that issues your voucher. But if it's mobile, I would imagine that, it should be fine. But that's really an issue. Yep, you got it. Okay, so let me see if I can start. Okay. So it looks like okay. So for the folks who are still waiting for answers to their questions online, it looks like Brian tried to respond, and for some reason it didn't work. So I apologize to all of you who have been patiently waiting for your answers. Okay, so Brian, so Brian's going to work from the bottom and on his way up. And while you do that, Brian, let me see if any other households on the phone have questions. And then I'll circle back and see where we are. So any other households on the phone call? Any other questions?
No, thank you. Good night, sir.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've answered all my questions, but I'm just still part of it.
Okay.
Hello?
Okay. Great.
Yeah, I'm just listening in case there's something you're saying that's important. So I want to hang up when you then finish the call.
Okay. Okay. All right. So let me, Brian. So Brian, I'll look at the top here. It looks like Michelle Nieves. I will be an employee of the city of Newton come September. Can I claim local preference? If you have a bona fide job offer, then the answer to that question is yes. If you have a bona fide job offer, so you would need to show that at this present time you already have that offer, then you can claim local preference. The next question from KT: what elementary school is in this area? The closest one is Cabot School. That is, I think that's the closest one. And Cabot School is probably all of a mile or a mile and a half, and was recently rebuilt and is apparently brand new and beautiful. Next question from Larry is, when is the initial lottery? I think I just answered that for the caller on the phone, but that was June 8th. Next question from Alyssa, same answer, same question. Will people be allowed to have pets? And answer to that is pets are allowed, but there are breed restrictions. When could people move is the next question from Alyssa. If you mean when could they move in, I think the answer to that is that the first units are coming online in early July, and then in the first building, and then in the other two buildings in late August. So probably sometime within there or shortly thereafter. But probably not, I don't think, any earlier than early July. Okay, then the next question from Arlene. Just make sure. Should be closer to the dog. Okay, so I think Brian has an answer to this question from Arlene. What percent assets do you add to income? So for assets, we take the greater of the actual income generated by the asset, Arlene, or 0.06%, whatever is greater, and we add that to your income. 0.06%, I think, is 4 zeros in front of the 6. So you need to have a lot in assets in order for that to amount to much of anything. So unless you have a huge amount of assets put away, then chances are we're going to be adding the actual income generated from the asset to your income total. Next question from KT. Okay, looks like Brian just answered that. Using the income limits for 2 people based on the number of people living in the unit. Okay, so I think Brian got up to KT and I just answered Arlene. I think that's I think that should be, I think we should be caught up on the answers to the questions that have come in on the live chat on YouTube. And I think all of the folks on the phone are just listening in, but none of you have specific questions. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, great.
That's correct.
So, all right, well, Brian and I are still here. I think we're caught up on everything. Okay, Luis, I asked a question regarding application routing preference. Luis, I'm not sure I know exactly what you mean. Could you say a little bit more about what your question is and I can try and answer it? Application routing. Oh, okay, I'm going back up here, Luis. Is there a preference for how the application should be sent? If you can email it, Luis, email is best. info@SEB Housing, it's on the front of your application, page 1. If you want to mail it, you can, but if you can email it, that's easiest, it's quickest, it's the most, that is the best way to do it. Okay, question from David. What happens to the wait lists after the units are all taken? The wait lists continue to exist, David. So if you don't end up getting to be able to rent a unit through this process, you would keep your spot on the waiting list, and that gets updated each year. And so, you know, if you were the next household in line, and the last unit got snagged, then when a household in one of those units, if they move out the next year, and you're still interested, you would get an opportunity for that unit. Next question from, okay, let's see here. I moved out from Newton on 4/10/20, temporary. If I get lottery, I will move in. Do I lose the preference? Brian, you can chime in on this one. I think if you temporarily moved from Newton based on these circumstances, but the intention was always, oh, okay. All right. So there's your answer. So I guess the answer is you do lose the preference. And just for folks on the phone, the local preference is at the time of the application. It's
Okay,
not
thank
based
you.
on a future, it's not based on a planning to move, you know, to Newton, or that's what I hope to do. I think the one exception to that, Brian, and this was a question that I had answered, is if you have an offer to work in Newton at the time you're applying, that would enable you to claim local preference. That's accurate, right? Yeah, right. So that answer is correct. Any other questions from any households? I appreciate people watching, and you guys had a lot of good questions. I hope that people found this informative. This is a really good opportunity in Newton for a really nice property, so we hope to see a lot of applications and look forward to working with a bunch of you in this process. And I will wait just a little longer here to see if there are any other questions that come in. Thank you for the comment, David. Appreciate it. Glad you found it helpful, and I hope a lot of people did, and I hope everyone's staying safe out there. And we'll hang out for just another minute or two to see if there are any other questions. All right, I think that's it, everyone. Thank you so much again for tuning in. Really appreciate it, and wish you best of luck with this process. And, you know, our information is on the application and info packet. So if you think of a question that, you know, later on that you want to ask, please go ahead and send it to us. And we'd be happy to get right back to you. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this info session. Thanks again, and have a great night, everyone. Take care.
You too, and thank you, and please don't forget to wear your mask.
Okay, thank you. Good night.
You're welcome. Good night, bye.
All right. Bye-bye.